All right, should we get started?
Yeah, sure.
Cool.
Welcome. This is the last session of the day here, and we're Eric Salazar is going to be presenting his talk on building and maintaining the barrel beer program. He's got over 25 years of experience creating award-winning beer aged in oak barrels. He began his career at New Belgium Brewing Company in 1995, where he fell in love with the creativity and enjoyment of making beer. Over the course of his time, he was a part of every aspect of the brewing process. Most notably, though, along with a small group of folks also obsessed with the traditions of Belgian brewers. He helped pioneer the wood-aged beer program at New Belgium, producing the first widely available and traditionally made sour beer by a U.S. brewer. Eric now calls Rochester, New York home, where he's excited to continue honing his craft with his friends and partners at Strangebird Beer.
Thank you very much. Right on. Thanks for coming. Welcome. I really, this talk I wanted to cover as much my experience and what I really have focused on in my entire career has always been aging sour beers and creating sour beers, mostly in foeders and small barrels. But there's a lot going on, you know. We as brewers, we like to be creative and we like to move on. So we're going to cover as much of it as possible. But I would also like to open up. I would like to say that anytime anybody has a question, just raise your hand. I'd like for this to be a discussion. There's a lot of things that I say in here, but I also want to just cover that by saying there's not one way to do this. There's the way I've done it, and there's recommendations that I have, but there's no rules per se. You do things the way you do it, and I would surely love to know how you do things, and I'm sure everyone else would love to have that information as well. So we as a community, we make each other stronger by sharing information, and yeah, exactly. I mean, the more that somebody has a beer from you that they love, they're more willing to try my beer, you know? So we all support each other. So high tide raises all ships. That's the rule, man. Anyway, I'm going to go through just a brief history of brewing in vessels. So beer origins, 10,000 BCE. Domestication of grasses really helped. Is that repeated? Let's not do that again. Probably a happy accident of beer making. Someone left their grain store outside in the rain. Oops. And then the sun came out. So that started sprouting, and the sun came out, and that helped those enzymes break down starches and fermentable sugars. Wild yeast, of course, then was just floating around, and that was the first spontaneous fermentation. Beer and all kinds of liquids were, there was all kinds of different things that they were stored in: gourds, tightly woven baskets, clay pots, eventually wooden buckets. Post-industrial revolution, though, everybody discovered different types of metals and brought new technologies. Copper, glass, stainless steel, aluminum, all was created, and that became pretty much the norm for a brewing industry. Early on, though, people, the way things were carried around and the way things were traded were mostly in these amphora pots. They were easy to roll around. They would stack interlockingly. You could put your label on there. You can see those ones each have their own little label there, so you knew where they were from and what they had. I don't know what that is. That is pretty interesting in there. Huh? No, that's. I mean, that's a pot, but I found this photo and I'm like, what the hell is that? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Hope that turns out for them. The Celts really started to use wood in 10,000 to 500 BCE, simply because they had it available. There was wood everywhere in Ireland. There's wood all over Europe, so it's watertight, it's durable, it's malleable. It's all the things that make a good carrying case for any type of liquid, powder, anything really. They used it for everything. I like to put this picture in there because that's actually a snapshot of a piece of Trajan's column in Rome from 113. And it's funny to me to look at those barrels as they're rendered there. They didn't change. They haven't changed much. I mean, they still look just like that, don't they? Right. So it's a good thing to have. It's a good container. Early uses in wood. This is like just my favorite. The early Sati brewers. You know, so they would use hollowed out logs, tipped slightly for runoff, and they would layer those with juniper, spruce, and birch and adler twigs and whatever, and that would help separate the mash from the wort. But it would also impart aromas, and it was really just a cool way to create beer. I've always wanted to just do that. Miko, do you want to hollow out some wood sometime and hollow out a tree and give that a go? What's that? Yeah, well, that'd be great. That will legitimize it. What's that?
Took guard from cultural appropriation.
Exactly. Yeah. Nobody can argue with us if we do that. All right. Cool. You're in. So throughout the ages, processes and techniques changed, but really, storing and shipping always remained in bottles, remained in barrels until very recently, as a matter of fact. But the old ways of brewing just started to fade away. And that's all Industrial Revolution stuff. We've got copper and stainless steel, and then we can store everything that way. Really, the Europeans, we owe a lot to the Belgians for continuing these traditions of aging beers in barrels and storing beers in barrels, and that's really like, without them, without some of the European brewers, this would have been a lost art. So we look to them for a lot, and it's really great that they've done that. For us, I like to think that we wouldn't have had the access to a lot of these barrels, especially in the early days in the 90s when we were starting out at New Belgium, without the wine industry and without the spirits industry, because they had all the barrels and they didn't want them. They were getting rid of them. And we would go to these wineries and ask them for their foeders, and we actually got Peter Buchart, the brewmaster in New Belgium at the time. He and I actually got kicked out of a winery that will remain unnamed because they found out who we were and what we were doing, and I think they assumed we were covered in Brettanomyces, and they were basically like, "Next time, just call." We wanted to come down, but it was really good to have them. They were getting rid of these. They were getting rid of their foeders, and they were getting rid of some of those barrels. And for us, they're neutral. So we really wanted them. They couldn't figure out why we wanted them. They were going to make hot tubs, and they were going to, burn them in fires and whatnot. So they were getting rid of them. This is a picture I took in Mexico, actually. And they actually made this old foeder into a. There's a little seat up there, a circular seat up there, and you can go up there and drink your wine. But yeah, I love foeders, so as you can tell. So we've done our best to learn those old techniques, and we carry that forward, create our own traditions, and that's encouraged. Be as creative as possible. Sourcing barrels. Now it's a little different now than it was then. Then it was cheap. You could almost just get them for a song. I remember. We got 4, they were 120 hectoliter foeders for 5 years, so it was 5 half pallets of beer. Every year we would send this winery a half a pallet of beer during their harvest time so that they would have a half pallet of beer. And it was a great deal, and we got these huge, beautiful foeders. They were awesome. Really, when you're sourcing used barrels, make friends, man. There's wineries, distillers, even maple syrup producers, and other brewers making quality beer. We were recently at Dre Fontaine, and they have a bunch of these Pilsner Urquell barrels, and this is actually a puncheon. It's huge. And they just have them. They've had them for 20 years. It's so cool to see those guys, see these barrels in that brewery. And they're perfect because they have already been used for beer. When they got them, they were ready for beer. They were ready for more beer. And Pilsner Urquell was getting rid of them. They cherish those. And then, of course, there's barrel brokers. We go with Finger Lakes Barrel Company a lot. They're close by and they're really reliable. And then, high class. Food Crafters, man. Can't say enough about these guys. Now, they're good with support. Their construction is wonderful. You don't have to restore the barrels when you get them. They come ready to go. Super nice. And they'll build them to fit your needs. A little plug for Food Crafters here. I really love those guys. When you're choosing barrels, especially used barrels, know a lot about them. Know where they're coming from. You know, if they're coming from a winery or a brewery or spirits producer that you don't like, don't bother. You know, ask what's in the barrel right now. So you want to know if it's full of product. That's the most preferred. And then when it's empty from that product, you can get it right away. Love that. But if it's not full of product and it is being stored, ask what the condition of the storage solution is, how long it's been there, has it evaporated, and really the best way to tell is always sight and smell. Stick your nose right in that barrel. If it doesn't smell good, don't take it. This photograph down here is actually a foeder. You can see how red it is, and it has a cooling plate in there. And then this other thing here was a screen for all the lees. But this is a really quality foeder, but it had a lot of wine in it. It took us some time to get that wine stain out and draw a lot of the tannins out of there, but it really was a beautiful foeder. So, I mean, always. So it can be hard to do, especially when you're dealing with brokers. You say, I want 5 barrels of yada yada, and they'll ship them to you. Fine. But if you have a chance to actually go to the producer and look at the barrels and smell the barrels, that's the way to go. I like to include this slide just to give you, people should know what they're talking about when it comes to a barrel repair if something goes wrong. And really, the most important part here, and the thing that goes wrong quite a bit, is that crow's groove. You can see it on the top of that stave there, and then where the head sits into that, where it says crow's bevel there. You'll see a lot of leaks coming out from there, and there's different ways to fix that. But barrel and foeder repair is going to be a lot longer of a presentation. So maybe I'll give that next year. We're gonna do that. I'll give you a little bit here though. So these tools have been around for ages. Nothing has really changed. The way they make barrels now is pretty high tech. But when it comes to repairing barrels, it's the same as it's been for a long time. Tools you need. So you can see this little handheld thing here. That's a scraper. That's probably the most complicated thing to have. The edge on it is actually a curved, sharpened edge, so that it has a little hook to it. So when you scrape the stave, and what you're doing is you're kind of exposing the wood, you're scraping off the outer layer of that wood. This is if you need to. If you have something that's blocked up that barrel's bad, you can always scrape it down one. You got to take the whole barrel apart. You have your hammer, of course. The hoop driver is the thing on the other side of the hammer there. And then the metal wedge, which is that metal piece in the middle. I don't even know if anybody manufactures those. We had to have that specially made. But that really comes in handy if you have through wood leaks, and then you can use these oak wedges right there to put into that little hole that you've made with that metal wedge. Like I said, I can do a whole presentation about barrel repair at some point. And an awl is a good thing to have. That goes well with those little oak spiles there. And river reed. The river reed we're seeing here, I got from a cooperage called Sugar Moreau, and I'm sure you've seen their barrels. They also make foeders in France. They make small barrels in California, and they actually had those shipped to us from France. Now, this is how the reed looks. On the outside of the reed, there's kind of like a grass-like surround, and you can peel that off. And when you peel that off, you get this inner, like, really soft, gummy meat. Now, both things have purpose. You can use the outside as you peel it off. You can use that as flagging for in between the staves, and then you can use this stuff to actually stuff in there and help seal up leaks. It soaks up liquid really well, and that will help to keep liquid between the staves, and then help the staves actually soak up liquid and hydrate enough to seal up themselves. So there's a lot going on there. And then Futex. Futex is that kind of it's that little tinfoil thing up there. That I got from France as well. You can also use beeswax or gate tallow, as it's called. Probably hard to find Futex. Futex is more like a clay and beeswax combination, but that's what they use in food production in France. So I would say pinhole leaks are the biggest issue that we always see. There's a lot of reasons for that. Wood borers. If you're getting your barrels from California, especially, they have a lot of wood borers. Wood borers, though, they tend to bore into wood in a corkscrew shape, so they can be a little bit harder to repair. Small knots can pop out, and nails and screws. Man, I've seen all kinds of crap. The tools you need for this, and I'm just going to go through this one repair thing, and then next year we'll learn more about everything else. Take a little bit of that reed meat that I was talking about, and stuff it into the hole. Here I'm using a flathead screwdriver, but I would prefer to use an awl. You can just jam it right in there and just pack it, essentially, and then put a little bit of Futex or gate tallow, that beeswax on the end of your spile there, and just pound your spile into that hole as deep as you can, and then you can actually just cut that right off, and you've repaired your pinhole leak in your barrel. It happens a lot. Cleaning and neutralizing. So, you're going to come across this probably all the time, especially if you're going from one type of beer to another beer, or you've got new barrels from a winery and you're not looking for wine in your beer. So I like to do a hot rinse, and then I fill it with, I fill the whole barrel with a warm water and sodium percarbonate solution. You can get that at any wine supply website. 2 grams per liter. Leave that for 24 hours. That will actually do a really good job of drawing out tannins, drawing out the red wine color from the stave, and you'll actually see it in the liquid when you drain it out. Then, and that has to be, that's probably best if it's warm. If you leave that set for 24 hours, if you have any leaks in that barrel, that'll actually help seal up those leaks. And then rinse thoroughly with cool water. Fill with cold water and a citric acid solution, 5 grams per liter. That'll neutralize that sodium percarbonate, and it'll also kind of prepare the beer for a lower pH. Drain and rinse heavy. I like to let that dry. I usually just turn it upside down and let it dry overnight. And then purge your CO2, and then you're ready to use that. Fill it up right away. Or if you're going to do if you're going to store that barrel for any amount of time, a citric acid and potassium metabisulfite solution is the best way to go. Citric acid will lower that pH and help to limit growth in there, as well as the potassium metabisulfite. So those two things together. You can store that, I would say, 2 months, depending on what's in the barrel before that. Always check it, though. Always open up the bung and give that a smell, because that will go bad. If it doesn't smell like sulfur, then it's probably time to change that water out. Probably time to change that solution out. Yes?
Do you just top up, or are you talking about full empty and then drink?
I would empty it all the way and then refill it with that solution. Cold water's fine. Yeah, cold water's fine. Yeah. Yeah. So and that's good. I've run across issues where, like, it was definitely stored too long, and then it started to smell a little swampy. Then you're in trouble. Then you probably have to go all the way back to the beginning and do your cleaning process again.
How long do you find that the storage solution lasts or very variable?
Yeah, it is variable depending on the quality of the barrel and what was in the barrel. I would say general rule is 3 months tops, right? Check it at 3 months. If it still smells like sulfur and it doesn't smell like swamp water, you could probably push that a little further, but yeah. Yes.
What's your preferred type of bong?
Oh, I like those. The vented bungs with the little cap that sticks down the center that lets out gas. That's the best bug.
Remember the website that you sent to me? Those are amazing.
Well, barrelbuilders.com. Yeah, that's what it is. They're out of California, and they have all that stuff. They actually have everything you're gonna need. All the stuff that I listed there, all the wood parts they'll have.
You work with the sulfur coals, the burn, and
I have worked with those, and I don't like them because the gas. Okay, I got a story about that. It's a good story. So we had these 120 hectoliter foeders at New Belgium, and what we would do is we would drop a line down the center of that foeder from the top, and a wire, and then we would tie like 12 of those sticks, those sulfur sticks, to that wire. Put a piece of tinfoil on the bottom, and basically you open up the manway. OSHA wouldn't like this at all. And you get in there and you light that thing on fire, and then you close the door, right? And so you fill that whole. Oh God, it's terrible. So there was a mix-up. The person I was working with, what we did is we would have, when we had to evacuate that, we had one of those like floor drying fans that we hooked up big giant hoses to, the kind that they bring air into the manways when they're working in small tight areas. And so the idea is you would put that in the door, and then you would blow it out, and it would suck in air from the atmosphere and clear out all that sulfur. Well, the guy I was working with mixed up the fan, and so we're wearing our gas masks, so we're fine, right? And we think we're evacuating this foeder, and then at New Belgium they had this whole team of like OSHA regulated safety people. They come in with their like gas tanks and their big masks and their hazmat suits, and like and we're just in there with our regular face masks. They're like, "You guys all right?" We're like, they're like, "Oh, you guys all right?" We're like, "We're fine. What's going on?" Like, you just evacuated the entire brewery because he was blowing in, yeah, and it was filling the entire brewery with sulfur smells. Yeah, it was horrible. Yeah. So, we had to put up with all kinds of shit for a long time, jokes in the hallway, everything. We stopped using it after that, It works. It's a good storage solution, but what I really don't like about it is it allows your barrel to dry out, right? And by filling it with a potassium metabisulfite and citric acid water solution, you're keeping that barrel hydrated, and that's half the battle.
you have another day of smoking.
Yeah. What's that? Yeah. Yeah.
I've done before. There's a whole day. Of just
Yeah, and then you got to do extra work. Yeah,
you throw
exactly.
water, just watch it.
Yeah. Yeah. So what we're talking about here today, wild aging, not wild aging. We call that tame aging. But it's funny because it's not so tame because you're using like whiskey barrels and port barrels and really high alcohol stuff. And then I want to touch on primary fermentation, and that's really where I want everybody to have some discussion here, if we have time, about their experiences. Andy, I'm looking at you. With primary fermentation in oak, because I feel like that's something that we're really kind of starting to do right now and do it good. So yeah, if we can talk about that, and that's the last thing. And really, what I really want to say here is, you see wild aging, you see not wild aging and primary fermentation. Let's just draw a big line right there between wild aging and everything else. Put those two things on other sides of your brewery. Keep those things completely separate. Take that wild aging, put it way in the back of a warehouse somewhere. Put it way back somewhere that's totally contained from the rest of your process, because you will become a wild brewery before too long, and then you'll be known for nothing but wild beers. That was the biggest thing. I mean, at New Belgium, I always said if Fat Tire was ever sour, then I'd be fired. I never got fired. It was good. So we talk about wild beers first. Sour versus funky. Sour means acidity, yes, but it's best balanced with other profiles for complexity and drinkability. And I really want to drive this home because I think there for a long time American brewers were saying, oh, it's sour beer. But that's all they were focusing on, and things became almost undrinkable. And, you know, maybe this is just my belief, but I feel like when you say a sour beer, that's a component of what you're producing. It's not the main thing. You're just saying this is going to be a little bit tart or this is going to be sour, but bring something else into it. Bring some maltiness to it. Oh, add fruit, whatever, you know, but if it's just sour beer, then it's lost complexity, it's lost its depth. And so I really think that if you want to make a quality sour beer, you're going to have to build that depth. And you're going to have to bring something to it that's not just sour. And that's the trick, you know? That's the fun part, you know? That's what blending's all about. Funky, of course, relies heavily on aroma. Brettanomyces is the big player there. And then I love the mixed fermentation. And you know, you're really relying on Brettanomyces for your sour beers anyway to a certain degree. So Brettanomyces is really going to help you with that varied aroma profile and different flavor profiles. Not every sour beer is funky. Not every funky beer is sour. Okay, so Brett, that's your first player in these barrels. Brettanomyces will be the first actor in your barrel, and it'll start to consume all the oxygen first, and it will drop the pH. That will pave the way for Pediococcus. Pediococcus likes a lower pH. It'll start to do its thing, create a little bit of lactic acid, drop that pH even further. Pediococcus is also responsible for a lot of your diacetyl aromas and even some latrine aromas. But because you have Brettanomyces there doing its job, and Brettanomyces will do its job all the time till the end of time. It will consume sugars in your wood. It will consume whatever the hell it can get its hands on. So luckily, you have Brettanomyces present. And then, once that pH is dropped, then Lactobacillus comes in, and Lactobacillus is your main player for that enjoyable sour that we really are looking for. Lactic acid. Lactic acid and Pediococcus convert sugar and malic acid into, or Lactobacillus and Pediococcus, convert malic acid and lactic acid into lactic acid. Some flavor threshold things there. But I don't know if you've ever tried to prop a Lactobacillus, but immediately, like the first aroma you get, and you know, sure, brothy, brown sugar, whatever, but I always think of like pinto beans cooking on the stovetop, and it's a little weird, right? You're like, I don't know if I want to put this in my beer, but that is pretty much the main aroma profile when it's just that. So it gets a little weird. Acetic acid is what you have to watch out for. Acetic acid loves oxygen. You know, as a matter of fact, like I say, if you're going to empty your sour beer vessel, clean it right away or fill it up right away. Don't let, because Acetobacter is going to be there. Acetobacter exists in your barrel no matter what. Once you give it access to oxygen, though, it's just going to start to take over. That's where your vinegar is going to come from. And I feel like there was a lot of sour beers there for a while that were kind of relying on Acetobacter as their souring, as their main sour flavor profile. And that's just, you know, I think they let a lot of oxygen happen there. Vinegar is what you end up with. Now, I have a story about that as well. We actually ended up with a very vinegar barrel one time, and we tasted it, and we're like, this is shitty beer. And then we tasted it again. We're like, well, this is really great malt vinegar. And so what we did is we actually made salad dressing. We took that vinegar barrel and we simmered some cranberries in it, and then we added olive oil, and then we bottled it, put it on our cork line, and actually gave it away to everybody at the brewery for Christmas one year. So if you're into selling vinegar, you can do that, you know. Lemons into lemonade. So microflora, you know, there's lots of ways to inoculate these barrels. Commercially, there's bootleg biology. I like what they do because they have all kinds of their own blends that work out pretty well, yeast and bacteria blends. They'll do brewer specific blends if you talk to them, and then they'll also give you kits to capture your own microflora. They're pretty cool. Look them up. Bootleg biology. Omega yeast is a good source, and then of course White Labs. So Peter Buchart, he now has his own brewery, and he swears by simply inoculating his entire brewery with other people's barrels. Now he's in a position where he can make friends, and people like to give him barrels, and so his favorite place to source his microflora from is from other breweries who are already doing sour beer. So if you can do that, that goes back to making friends. Make friends, and then trade barrels, and you can diversify your microflora in your brewery. You can also use your own mash mixer or ladder ton. We did that. We actually used our mash mixer. There we go. Tongue tie. We used our mash mixer as a cool ship, and it worked out pretty well. Then we ran that into the lauter ton over some pears that some friends of ours had growing in their yard, and that inoculated the beer, and it's actually turned out really well. So get creative, you know? You don't necessarily have to own a cool ship. You don't necessarily have to buy bootleg biology stuff either. You can find it. And then, of course, there's that. The cool ship. Look at how nice that is. All copper. Oh, that's beautiful. If you have the means, get a cool ship. Spontaneous inoculation. You know, this is pretty cool because you can say that this is all local microflora that you've brought from the area around your brewery. I'm sure you all know how it works, but we'll run through it. You cool wort in a shallow vessel overnight. It's inoculated with bacteria and wild yeast. Then you take that beer, and it's a good idea to blend that all into a separate tank so that you get everything mixed up and nice and homogeneous. And then you can transfer to barrels from there. You can also do fermentation between that and stainless if you really feel like it. But the pellicle. Let's see if we can get a better look at that. No, it's there. So the pellicle is that really kind of why is this not acting like I want it to act? Well, you can see it back there anyway, and you've seen it in your barrels. The pellicle really is like that's your protector. That's your guard against oxygen ingress to the rest of the barrel. What's really happening there is because you have a healthy microbe colony, you're creating this pellicle, and that healthy colony is actually creating this pellicle and protecting itself from oxygen. It's really cool. So it's a sign of health. It shows that you've achieved a diverse and active colony of microbes. What you should know about it is that pellicle also is heavy in acetobacter because acetobacter loves oxygen. So if you can avoid transferring that out into your final product at all costs, do, because that'll just create off flavors. But I will say this, and what we try to do when we were emptying fooders, it's a lot easier because you can pull liquid from the bottom and the pellicle will just drop, and we'd pull very slowly so we wouldn't suck in any of that pellicle, and then we'd leave it, and then we'd refill and keep the pellicle on top and just let it fill back up. With small barrels, it's a little harder because you have to pierce it with your racking wand. But just keep an eye on it. Don't pull it all into your pull it all into your blend, into your final blend, because you will get some off flavors for sure. So what we were doing in New Belgium was we were doing primary fermentation with lager, because lager imparts less esters, and so those esters don't get in the way of the final product. Worked out pretty well for us. Aging inoculated beer in barrels really feeds the bacteria and all of the so because we were talking about earlier how the microflora kind of supports each other through the processes, so it helps get to the next process. Wood is really letting oxygen through the staves and feeding the bacteria. It really doesn't like a whole lot of oxygen, but it will take a little bit. And it's called facultative anaerobic organisms. And so they don't really they'll act differently when they get too much oxygen, and they'll act differently when they don't get any oxygen. So what you're trying to do is limit the oxygen, but still feed it. Now you'll have, if you can picture a barrel or a foeder, as a matter of fact, you'll get convection in there. So the beer on the outside actually has access to that oxygen that's feeding through the staves, and it'll start to get active, and it'll rise. And as it rises, the stuff in the middle will come out, and then it'll get access, and the stuff on the outside will go to the middle. So you'll get this nice convection in your barrels, and eventually you'll get all of that beer and all that bacteria will have access to that oxygen, and will be able to do what it needs to do and acidify your beer. That's where patience comes in. You have to have patience. Don't think that when something tastes bad in 6 months that it's a dumper necessarily. So you have to give things time. We've tasted beers at 6 months that tasted like straight poop, and then came up with something really good out of that barrel 6 months later. I mean, it tasted like poop. Scary. Don't tell the bosses. I'm a big fan of blending, right? Sure, some barrels are so good that you can just package that one barrel, and I say go for it, especially if you're in love with it and you're like, oh man, this one barrel's awesome, and you can release that. But blending allows you to actually pinpoint the flavor profiles that you intend. And the Goose traditions are a blend of 1, 2, and 3 year lambics. Rodenbach actually blends their aged sour with fresh beer to create a more depth of flavor profile, so you get a little bit of sweet offsetting that sour, and you have a lot more flavor profiles in there. And that's what I really appreciate. That's what I really like when I'm thinking about a sour beer. I like it when somebody can balance those things in such a way that I'm enjoying a lot more going on than just sour. And then, of course, you can blend with what you like. Fruit, other beer, anything legal. I always like to add fruit after the aging process. I found that if you add fruit during the aging process, you tend to lose that fruit profile. But it's really what you're going for. That's just my own preference. Why use used barrels and foeders? Diminished tannins and vanillin. So the wine industry has already drawn out a lot of those tannins. Tannins, while being astringent, are also antimicrobial, right? So if you're trying to add bacteria to barrels, you're not going to get the lifespan that you want out of that bacteria if there's too much tannins. But tannins can also, though, in small amounts, create a little bit of body for your beer. There's always going to be tannins, right? The key is to just minimize the tannins in your beer, right? That's always going to be there. It's how it is. Vanillin. phenolic aldehyde. So you get something, and of course, like with whiskey barrels and whatnot, of course, you always want that, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. But if you have a nice fresh barrel and you put a beer in there, you're going to draw out the vanillin, and then that beer is going to have a vanilla aroma profile. Now, if you want to do that same beer again in that same barrel, it's going to be less, obviously, and subsequent batches after that. So it's nice to start out with a barrel that's totally neutral. That's, and it really depends on what you're going for. You could put a beer in there that you want to be vanilla and draw it out on purpose and then have that plan. But if you're doing the same beer in that barrel over and over again, it's going to be a different beer after the third try. And of course, spirit barrels. Why use whiskey barrels? Whiskey. Bourbon barrels, they only use those barrels once, which is really nice because they're fresh and they have all that nice oak, and the liquid, the spirit, hasn't drawn out too much of it. Whiskey barrels you can use as many times as you want, as a rule. So, story about that. Leopold Brothers. We used to do a lot of collaboration with Leopold Brothers Distillery out of Denver, and so they would produce their bourbon in their barrels, and they would let it age, however long they let it age, and they would take those same barrels and they would use them to make their fruited whiskey barrels by adding the fruit in there and just letting them marry for 2 months, and then they would ship us those barrels, and then we would get a blackberry whiskey barrel and we'd make a blackberry whiskey sour beer. We'd let it marry in there for 2 months, we'd empty it out, that was a product, and then send those barrels back to them where they'd do it again and then send them back to us, and those barrels just went back and forth, and it was really a cool thing. So you can use whiskey barrels as many times as you want. Char levels. So it's good to understand what the char levels are for and what they do for the spirit producer. So it just brings out different flavor profiles. The char itself can help to clarify the spirit. That's good for them. But high char is responsible for the vanillin and smoke from lignin, and breaks down hemicellulose into wood sugars, allowing for caramelization. So you get a little bit of that caramel, whatnot. Low char allows the lactones to maintain structure and brings out the woody and more coconut bready notes to the spirit. So, whatever you're going for with your beer that you're putting into these spirit barrels, it's good to know the char level of the barrel. It's good to know what the whiskey is that's coming out of there, or bourbon that's coming out of there, and taste it. Always know what's in that barrel first. Don't just take any barrels willy-nilly. We use port barrels. We just like the port tones. White port barrels we recently came across, and those really bring out a little bit of a stone fruit and a mild citrus note. That's really nice. Rum barrels are a bitch. But because they're always messed up, right? They're always just been treated like hell. But rum is nice, and it depends on what you're going for. And there's so many different types of rum out there that you can really get a variety. Pick and choose those as you want. Tequila barrels are fun, but man, it doesn't go with everything. We did it. We did tequila barrel aged triples, which were awesome. I thought that turned out really well. Yeah.
How would you recommend a store a whiskey barrel of Chinese?
Yeah, I would say if you're going to use a whiskey barrel, use that whiskey barrel right away. Get it from the whiskey producer, hopefully wet, and use it right away. But in between, you can do the same storage solution as I set out, but you're still not going to get as much out of it the next time. Whiskey barrels are tough because they're great for that first use, and then they're going to become neutral barrels, right? You'll get a little bit less and less as time goes on.
I had a distiller tell me that, you should juice it before you use it.
I'm not going to...
I don't know about how much, but...
I'm not going to... Oh, sure do that. I think that's borderline fortifying, but I mean, yeah, you know, whatever. I didn't tell you that. So primary fermentation. Now, with the small wine barrel, what we've been doing is we've been getting our barrels as neutral as possible, of course. It's been said that yeast, active fermentation, the yeast brings out different flavors. Now, what we found was we've got a much softer mouthfeel. We got a little bit of a vanilla aroma, and I was attributing that to active fermentation. Now, I've read some things from the wine industry that say the opposite, but I mean, you know, experience is really what it takes, and that's my experience with that. And I don't know if anybody else has had any other experience with active fermentation and flavor profiles that are different from what that beer would be otherwise. Anybody? Yes.
I think it speeds up the process.
Speeds up the process.
You know, because of the temperature fluctuation.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a lot of brick houses they're you know, in Kentucky when they had swings of temperature.
Right. Yeah.
Better flavored product.
Right.
So you know, having that fermentation, all that active that rise and fall temperature,
I think you're right about
more
that.
flavor will speed up. So
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I mean, it's something that I think we're still kind of experimenting with, right? But I think keep going, just keep doing it. What we've been doing is we've been getting down to about a quarter of the way left of primary fermentation, then transferring into those barrels, and then repitching them a little bit so that you don't get any of the off flavors. Plus, you don't get a stalled out fermentation. So,
Yeah.
and so we've been doing that with clean barrels, and with clean beer, and that's been working out pretty well. And then just leave it in there for a few weeks till fermentation is finished. That's in the small barrels.
Stick with the same strain across the board?
What's that?
Are you repitching the same strain?
Yeah. What I'll do is I'll fill out of that fermenter and then just grab a little pitch off the bottom. Yeah, and as a matter of fact, really it's really easy if you're using a racking arm. Fill from the top and then just dip down for a little bit, and then and then go back up, and then you'll get a nice mix in there. That's for the small barrels. It's been working out pretty well. Then there's this beautiful little guy here, which we do not own, and someday, though, right? Mika, let's get that on the list. Yeah, and I mean, for obvious reasons, this is a really great vessel. I mean, it has everything that you want in a fermentation vessel, but it also is oak. So, who has experience with this? Who wants to talk about this at all? Anyone? Nobody.
We have one.
Let's get one. You have one that's not. I mean, yeah, fooders are. Yeah. I mean, the conical thing is just. I know they have one at Prison City.
I'm pretty sure Freaks Brewing in Brooklyn just.
Right? Did they? Yeah. It's pretty cool. So I think, you know, like you get all that active fermentation draw from the wood, and you still have the advantages of a conical tank. And then Andy, I was going to call on you about your process for wood aging fermentation.
Yeah, we've done a lot of different things.
Or wood
So
barrel.
we've done what Eric was describing, like fully ferment and stainless transfer to barrels with souring bacteria and rot. But we've also just run straight wort into the barrel, and I think it's a interesting way to. I do feel like we get a little bit more out of the wood that way, a little faster. But the biggest difference that I noticed is you're basically just so we're either, if it's a fresh barrel that doesn't have a culture in it, we're adding generally a quarter of whatever our favorite barrel is. So that's the way that we're inoculating that, and then filling with wort. It's a way of like just jump starting the lacto, which drops the pH quickly, which has kind of a downside of the, as that pH drops before the breath's really getting going, it kind of suppresses the expression of the breath, I think. So that's kind of the downside. The way that we've lately been trying to tip the scale back more towards breath is by upping our hopping rate. So we're using hops to kind of like.
Oh, so you're balancing out the, yeah, okay. That's pretty cool.
So basically our process is if we are adding a finished, already fermented sour beer, we do that. If it's a used barrel, we do like a hot kill. I built like a spray ball to go up in the barrel, 180-degree water, spray it through the spray ball, and then we just fill it up with work. We're not pitching actively pitching any culture. It's just everything that's living in the barrel at that point. So then we top it up with wort to like somewhere between half and 2/3. Like definitely don't go too high in that barrel, because when fermentation kicks off, it makes a mess of everything, and that's not really the mess that I want all over the brewery.
Yeah.
So we let that fully ferment, and then we generally we've done specific wort streams for sour beer, but we've also we make a lot of Hefeweizen, and it's a pretty similar wort to what we would use for a blonde sour beer. So usually we're just topping up with hot wort after it's fully fermented, trying to displace all of that oxygen and still not make a mess. So
Right.
we might need to top it up once and then top it up again.
Cool. I like that. Intricate process. Right on. Anybody else have any primary fermentation experience with that? Well, let's do it. Let's get out there and try it. Yeah, what do you?
We're eating mostly like sort of like a Mexican primary fermentation
Process, yeah.
Similar to what Andy was describing, but we're just topping up with one of the other barrels.
Right.
So when the primary settles out, just use a barrel and then everything else.
Use that as the.
Barrel with the filtered red. I think the main difference between chronicle and primary is that something all that biomass
Yeah.
in beer. Maybe you're
Right.
from that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean that's why that thing's
Yeah.
beautiful. Expensive, but beautiful.
So, but if you look at something like that, I think that's okay.
Yeah.
From above.
Yeah.
So for your ones you're describing, are you kind of racking that quickly?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's that, and that goes in and comes right out. Yeah. As soon as fermentation's done. And what we've been doing is so we'll have a beer in fermentation, and then we'll just take a little bit of that beer, put it over into neutral barrels, and then when both beers are done, we'll package both beers and release them simultaneously, so you can have the two beers together and kind of feel the differences between the two beers, right? And it's kind of a neat thing for the tasting room. You know, people can say the barrel fermented version, and then the regular stainless version. Yeah. Cool. Man, let's get going on this. Let's get some data and let's start experimenting and share that. And then maybe one day somebody can do a whole talk on oak barrel fermentation, and we can all learn stuff. I do not recommend setting your fooders outside, but we're bringing them in, and I thought that was a good shot. Don't do it though. They're just gonna dry out and get nasty. Suggested reading, of course, Brewer's publication. This is a good book, especially when you're talking about sour beers and whatnot. This book really covers everything, and it's a beautiful book. I'm sure you're familiar with these books. And that Lambic book, I threw that up there, but good luck finding it. I think I saw it on Amazon for $55. But it's still a great book on lambic. Really awesome. Shameless plug for our wonderful brewery, and thank you.
I've been there.